a lot of what you're talking about here is context setting too, like price
Yeah.
is context, right? Um, there's this Virgil Abloh quote that we've been talking about among ourselves where he says, you could take a candle and put it in a garage and it would seem worthless, or you could put that candle in a gallery with white walls and it'll seem like art, right? How, I think a lot of strategists or, a lot of us are brand strategists as well, by the way. We have to ask ourselves, like, where are we going to put our resources? Designing the room or designing the object? Telling the story of the room or telling the story of the object? What's your take
The,
on creating context? Go ahead.
the crashing mistake that's been made by economists, but also by logical people all over the place, is exactly. There's a wonderful example on YouTube where is it Joshua Bell, who's the kind of Carnegie Hall violinist, okay, plays like a busker in a kind of metro station, okay, and here he is, the world's greatest violinist, playing in a metro station, and
Yeah.
people just walk
Yeah.
past, and a few people kind of flip him a quarter, okay. And finally, one person comes along who recognizes him again. What the hell are you doing busking in it? Okay, but there's the Austrian School of Economics. They tend to get, understandably, actually, slightly vilified for tending to be on the right. You had Hayek, von Mises, all those people, Murray Rothbard in the US. But they were definitely right about one thing, which is that value, the only worthwhile measure of value in a free economy, is what someone's willing to pay for something.
Yeah.
Okay. And that is a product of the thing itself and the context in which it's presented, in the same way that we wrap Christmas presents for that reason, even though in a sense it's totally pointless. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Here's your Xbox. It doesn't, okay. Now, the interesting thing there is that there's a great quote, I think, from Ludwig von Mises, where he says something like, "There's no sensible distinction to be made between the value created in a restaurant by the man who cooks the food, which is
Yeah.
kind of manufacturing, and the value created by the man who sweeps the floor. Because the man who sweeps the floor, marketing, he means
Yeah.
effectively,
Yeah.
is the man who creates the setting and the context and the expectation in which the food can be fully enjoyed.
Yeah.
Because human perception is leaky, okay? I'll give you an example of this. Go and make yourself a fantastic meal and then try eating it with a fork where one of the tines is bent slightly out of line. Okay,
Yeah.
you won't enjoy the food. Go and make a fantastic Michelin starred meal and then sit in a room that smells of sewage. Okay, you're not going to enjoy the meal. And the same applies to not only smell and taste and so forth, it applies to expectation and goodness knows what else. They're wonderful experiments where people go around organic food fairs with KFC and
Yeah.
everybody goes, "Oh, it's marvelous. You
Oh,
can
I
taste
haven't seen those.
the authenticity of and they're just taking something from McDonald's or KFC to an organic food fair. And of course, the taste changes. And Andy Clark, I think, explains why the expectation changes the experience and why the context, because one of Andy Clark's points is that obviously human perception is going to be highly geared to context, in that, there are times when it pays us to ignore footsteps,
Yeah.
on a crowded street. And there are times, a dark alley at night, where the footsteps literally dominate your consciousness to a huge extent. And so creating the setting, the sort of mise en scène for a product, is just as much a part of value creation as actually manufacturing and designing the product itself. Because, and I would go further and say, I'm always intrigued actually um, by great products, okay, genuinely great, objectively great products, which have failed because of a marketing
Yeah.
accident. Now, one of them is Google Glass. I don't know if anybody else thinks that, but I always thought Google Glass in principle was a fantastic idea. But then you had the problem of glass holes, the fact that it filmed people without them necessarily knowing, and then actually, because Larry, I think one of the Google founders, I think it was probably Larry Page, was having an affair with the girl who was in charge of glass. He kind of got involved and meddled and encouraged them to launch far too soon, because
Mm.
apparently he has a limited attention span. Another example would be, I was peripherally involved in a product called the Meta or Facebook Portal TV, which
Mm.
is a camera that sits on top of your TV and lets you video conference in high definition it's astounding. Okay, I've got about four of them. They're only about $140, and it's really a $500 piece of video calling equipment, which costs $120. Again, people were so paranoid about Facebook putting a camera in their house that nobody bought it. And then there's this other thing I came across the other day, which has just been relaunched, the wine box. Does anybody remember the wine box? Okay, it's
Like
fantastic.
boxed, you mean boxed wine, or is it
Yeah, yeah,
something
yeah.
else? Yeah, we
I
all.
mean, the witch should have killed the wine, and rationally, it should have killed the wine bottle. Okay.
Yeah.
Rationally, it should have killed the wine bottle. But what happened is that cheap wine tended to be sold in wine boxes. It just became déclassé and was just
Yeah.
considered socially a bit naff. And for entirely peripheral reasons, you know, it keeps for about 15 days. You get 2 liters of wine. You can serve yourself with a tap. You can keep it in the fridge if it's white, or, you know, out in the open if it's red. You know, it's a fantastic idea. But again, it didn't go anywhere. And then you have even worse problems like frozen food. I don't know what the relationship is in the US. In the UK, frozen food is considered pretty down market.
I think similarly here.
It's
Not
simple,
that down market,
but
but yeah,
it's not, you know,
not fresh.
no. Actually, weirdly, in France, the premium kind of food chain called Pika is a frozen food chain, because the French have a
Mm,
completely different attitude to frozen food. It is actually in many ways fresher and more
yeah,
nutritious than fresh food that's been kind of sprayed with nitrogen or whatever. But because it was so efficient and transportation was so efficient and shelf life was so long, it became cheap. And because it became cheap, it became associated with poorer people. And
yeah,
so you have the ridiculous phenomenon of people going to, you know, buying expensive fresh food, which probably isn't as good, in
yeah,
preference to far better value frozen food.
yeah.
And so this question, I mean, you know, one of the things I would argue is that I go even further and say that actually my wife's a vicar in the Episcopalian Church, like the Church of England,
Hmm.
as it's called here. I always slightly tease her in defense of marketing by saying no one would have heard of Jesus if it wasn't for St. Paul. Okay. You need a kind of marketing sales guy to
Yeah.
actually get the message out. And if you look at people, Steve Jobs, okay, James Watt, to some extent, actually, Edward Jenner, who invented vaccination, Henry Ford, and particularly Edison, they're actually hucksters. Okay, they're marketers, they're salesmen. Okay, they won't get remembered as that. They'll get remembered as inventors or technologists or whatever. But the thing that made them supremely successful was really their, you know, their ability to tap into human insight and to
Yeah.
work out how to sell. I mean, Edison was shameful as a salesman. I mean, the
Mm,
reason you have the electric chair as a form of execution in the United States, I think it only survives in a few states now.
hmm.
That arose because Edison was in competition with Westinghouse. Westinghouse did an alternating current system. Edison did a direct current system. Edison wanted to create the idea that AC was dangerous. And so he basically sponsored one or two states to use alternating current to actually
Wow.
electrocute people. Okay.
Wow. So he
Now,
created a lot of context around
okay,
it.
right, right.
Wow.
Now, that was literally, I mean, this is some of the stuff is, you know, if you look at Otis, the great elevator pioneer, it was going to state fairs and doing these demonstrations where, you know, you'd cut the cable with a bunch of children in a bloody elevator, you know, and then
Yeah.
it would drop 3 inches and then grip the sides. Um, but it's a really, I mean, a lot of this stuff is really, really interesting because you realize that actually most human behavior is the default mode of human behavior is social copying and habit. Do what I've done
Yeah.
before, do what everybody else does. Perfectly valid evolutionary reasons for that, by the way, most of the
Yeah.
time, because if you've done it a lot before, okay, well, it probably doesn't kill you because you'd be dead
Yeah.
by now. And equally, if loads of other people are doing this, well, they've probably done it before, so this thing probably doesn't kill you.
Yeah.
Totally rational in evolutionary terms that we're driven by habit and social copying. But it
Yeah.
does mean that the default mode of humans is basically do the same as everybody else, do the same as I've always done, which means that any kind of invention or innovation, really, I mean, to be honest, you should think of, you know, you should actually think about the marketing alongside the development of the product,
Yeah.
really.